What's up, future CPAs, and welcome to This Explainer. Look, if you're a BS accountancy student right now, you already know the deal. Management Advisory Services, or MAS, can honestly feel like the ultimate boss battle of the LECPA. But today, we're going to completely conquer a very specific, highly testable subtopic: plant shutdown decisions. Our goal here isn't just cramming. We're going to build deep, logical neural pathways so that 3 years from now, when you're finally sitting in that chilly exam room, you won't be sweating trying to remember some random formula. You're just going to intuitively know exactly how to solve it. Let's get into it.
So, picture this. Your company gets hit by a massive economic depression, or maybe a crazy natural disaster, or even a severe supply chain strike. Suddenly, your operations are just bleeding cash, and your plant is squarely in the red. Now, human nature, the emotional gut reaction, is to panic, lock the doors, and just try to stop the bleeding immediately. But as an accountant and a strategic advisor, you know it's never quite that simple. So the million-peso question: do you actually close up shop? All right, here's our game plan for today. We're going to tackle the ultimate shutdown dilemma, decode those tricky shutdown costs, break down the indifference point formula, crack a real case study together, and finally, I'll hit you with some rapid-fire LECPA bullet review hacks. Okay, starting with part 1, the ultimate shutdown dilemma. When a business segment faces really severe but temporary adverse conditions, normal profit-making is basically out the window. It's off the table. The decision becomes strictly binary. Do we continue operations, keep our presence in the market, but swallow a net operating loss? Or do we temporarily shut down to try and minimize that financial bleeding? It's completely a survival strategy. We're not trying to get rich right now. Our only goal is to figure out which of these two terrible options results in the smallest total loss for the company. Moving right along to part 2, decoding the shutdown costs. To figure out our absolute best move, we kind of have to define the enemy here. Shutdown costs are those unavoidable fixed expenses that are going to hunt you down even if you completely lock those factory doors. We're talking about things like property taxes, security guards, and basic maintenance fees. Plus, and this is a big one, if you shut down, you eventually have to restart, right? So any one-time startup costs required to get the plant running again, like rehiring staff or recalibrating your machines, those absolutely have to be factored into your shutdown costs. Now, for your brain to process this efficiently under serious exam pressure, you need to use a trick called cognitive chunking. Just divide your fixed cost into 2 separate buckets. Bucket 1, avoidable operating expenses. These are the costs that literally disappear when you shut down, like salaries for plant supervisors you might temporarily lay off. Bucket 2, unavoidable shutdown costs. These are the sticky sunk costs that are hanging around no matter what you do. Distinguishing between these 2 buckets, that is the secret code to unlocking this entire topic. Which brings us nicely to part 3, the indifference point formula. So the indifference point, which is also known as the shutdown point, is basically this magical sales volume where the total loss from continuing operations is exactly the same as the total loss from shutting down. Instead of just blindly memorizing the formula, let's logic our way through it step by step. Step 1, identify your total fixed costs if you stay open. Step 2, subtract your unavoidable shutdown costs. Mathematically, what you're left with are your avoidable fixed costs. Step 3, just divide that number by your contribution margin, or CM, per unit. You're essentially just figuring out how many units you need to sell to cover the exact costs you could have avoided by shutting down. Makes sense, right? Go ahead and take a mental screenshot of this formula right now. It's total fixed costs minus shutdown costs, all divided by the contribution margin per unit. And hey, remember, contribution margin is just your selling price minus your variable costs. Seriously, lock this image into your memory. This is going to be your primary weapon for the exam. All right, part 4, cracking the case study. Let's see this in action. Let's put all this theory into practice with a classic scenario straight from the research review materials. So we've got the John Lloyd Company, and they're expecting a massive drop in sales. Their selling price is 3 pesos per unit. Their variable costs are 2 pesos per unit. Their total fixed costs to keep operating are 5,000 pesos a month. But if they decide to suspend operations, they're still going to be hit with this shutdown costs for stuff like plant maintenance and taxes of 2,000 pesos a month. Okay, do the math mentally alongside me here. It seriously helps with long-term retention. First up, find the contribution margin. 3 pesos minus 2 pesos gives us a CM of 1 peso per unit. Next, isolate those avoidable costs. Total fixed costs of 5,000 minus the unavoidable shutdown costs of 2,000 gives us 3,000 pesos in avoidable costs. Finally, just divide those avoidable costs by the CM. So, 3,000 pesos divided by 1 peso per unit. Boom! And there is our boss battle winning number.
3,000 units. That right there is our indifference point. If the John Lloyd Company sells exactly 3,000 units, their operating loss is going to be exactly 2,000 pesos, which, you guessed it, is the exact same loss they'd suffer if they completely shut down. So, the absolutely crucial part is how we actually use this number to make our decision. Here is the golden rule you must apply on the LCPA. If your expected sales are greater than the indifference point, let's say you expect to sell 4,000 units, you must continue operations because your total loss will actually be smaller. But if your expected sales fall below that point, say only 2,000 units, you have to temporarily shut down to minimize the financial bleeding. Last but definitely not least, Part 5 LECPA Bullet Review Hacks. I need your absolute undivided attention here. Take a mental snapshot of these cheat codes because they are going to secure your points on exam day. Ready? Rapid fire. The indifference point is the exact volume where the loss is identical, whether you stay open or close. The core formula, avoidable fixed costs divided by contribution margin per unit. Don't forget, shutdown costs equal your unavoidable fixed costs plus any startup costs to reopen. And that ultimate decision matrix, expected sales greater than the indifference point, continue operations. Expected sales less than the indifference point, shut down. I love this quote from the RISA materials because it just brilliantly illustrates the core philosophy you need as a CPA dealing with this stuff. It says, since there is no immediate possibility of profit, the problem is just how to minimize the loss. In MAS, it's not always about maximizing wealth. Sometimes it's literally just about strategic survival. And there you have it. You've officially mastered the planned shutdown decision. You know exactly how to chunk the data into buckets, logic your way through the formula, and analyze that indifference point to minimize losses. But before we wrap up, ask yourself this. What happens when shutting down temporarily permanently damages your brand reputation? Are there hidden, non-financial costs to closing the doors that aren't showing up on a balance sheet? Keep practicing this logic, trust the mental pathways we just built, and I will catch you in the next explainer. Keep grinding.